And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is hypnotist and author Rob Schwartz, and today we'll talk about pre-birth planning of our lives and more. Rob, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Jeff. I appreciate that you do this podcast. I think it's bringing a lot of much needed light into our world.
The pleasure is all mine. Rob, what was the catalyst that started you on your spiritual journey in the first place?
The first catalyst was actually the near-death experience. When I was in my 30s, so very long ago, the first guidance I got from Spirit, and at the time I didn't even recognize that it was guidance from Spirit. I only saw that in retrospect. But the guidance was to read books written by people who had had NDEs. And this had the effect of just completely opening me up to Spirit, which was the intended effect. That was the foundation for everything I went on to do after that point.
I like how you use the words guidance by Spirit. Do you feel like we are always gently being guided by Spirit, but we just don't recognize it?
I think that's very much the case for the average person. But, you know, we're in the middle of a worldwide spiritual awakening, and there are more and more people exponentially, in my opinion, who are coming into the awareness that they're more than the body. There's more than just this lifetime. They don't cease to exist at the end of this lifetime, and that they are cradled and loved, treasured and adored by Spirit and guided gently, as you put it, every single instant.
What do you think is the best way to recognize that guidance and to try to tune into it more often?
I think that varies from person to person, and you have to figure out what is your primary mode of receiving information from Spirit. For many, many people, it will be feeling. The soul speaks to the personality through feeling. Feeling is the language of the soul. So if you pay close attention to your feelings, and don't suppress them or ignore them, what you find is that they're informational. They're telling you very important information all the time. And a lot of this information is coming from your soul, your spirit guides, and so forth. But other people get the information visually. Some people get it through hearing. And when I say hearing, I mean hearing communication internally, not necessarily an external voice, although that can happen too. Synchronicity is a big way for Spirit to guide us, but you have to notice the synchronicities. It doesn't do much good if they happen and you simply don't notice them. Those are some of the main ways.
You mentioned NDEs. Is it possible that you had at least an NDE-like experience that led you down this path, or did it start with getting a hypnotherapy session?
I actually call it an STE, or spiritually transformative experience. This happened when I was 40 years old, which I firmly believe was planned by me to happen at that time exactly. And basically what happened was I was home. I was self-employed at that time in my life doing corporate work, very boring corporate work. And in the middle of a weekday afternoon, I decided just to take a break and go for a walk. Was walking down the sidewalk. This was in Chicago, Illinois, where I lived at the time. And I had this experience in which all of a sudden, every time I looked at another person, this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for that person washed over me. And I call it pure unconditional love because that's as close as I can get in the English language. But that doesn't even begin to touch what I was feeling. It was a divine love, and it was a transcendent love. It only went on for about an hour, but it completely changed everything I understand about who and what I am and who and what everybody else is and the nature of the soul. Basically, you could say that I was caused to know. I was caused to know in this experience that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. Now, what I didn't know at the time was why this was happening. That became clear a couple of years later. By that time, I had quit the corporate world. I'd spent a couple of years researching people's pre-birth plans. Every single plan I looked at, without exception, was based on complete unconditional love for every person involved. And then I realized, aha, that experience walking down the sidewalk that day that was gifted to me so that when I found this result in my research, I would be absolutely certain that what I was finding was truth.
Quite a few of my near-death experiencers believe that they had their NDE planned out pre-birth. Do you think that planning an NDE would be the most greatest challenge a person could have?
Well, greatest challenge is, that's a relative concept. So some things that are challenging for you might not be challenging for me, and what challenges me might not challenge you. Having an NDE, though, is certainly a great challenge for anybody. I haven't had one. Again, I think what I experienced was different than that. But as I understand it, integrating an NDE can be very challenging. And then once you experience the great unconditional love and peace of the other side, and you come back to duality, that's one heck of a difficult transition. And so, as you know, many people who have NDEs have this yearning, this longing to go back. They wish they weren't here. That's a very challenging thing to process.
Can you give us details on actually how the pre-birth planning happens?
Well, let me preface this by saying the ways I research people's pre-birth plans, working with mediums and channels who in one way or another, and they had very different kinds of abilities, but one way or another, they could find out what somebody planned. And then the particular form of hypnosis I practice, which is called a between-life soul regression. In that form of hypnosis, the client speaks directly to what is called their council of elders. These are the very wise, loving, and highly evolved beings who oversee their personal evolution and who therefore know literally everything about them, including everything about the plan for this lifetime. So after doing many, many between-life soul regressions, and many, many sessions with mediums and channels about people's pre-birth planning, what I learned is that the plan is created by the soul, the higher self, in consultation with God or source, masters, angels, spirit guides, other souls who will be in the incarnation, and so forth. Once the plan is put in place, the soul creates the personality, which is a portion of the soul's energy. The personality is then informed by the soul and by the spirit guides of what the life plan consists of. At that point, the vast, vast majority say, this is great, I'm looking forward to it, let's go, and they incarnate. But there's a small percentage who start to fear or doubt that maybe the plan is too ambitious, maybe it's just too much. If you say that, then you are reassured by your guides and soul that it is for your and everybody's highest good. And you feel their overwhelming love for you. And so you really do believe that it is for your highest good. So most who express fear or doubt will then say, okay, I'm on board, and they incarnate. But there's a small percentage of the small percentage who expressed fear or doubt who continue to express fear or doubt. If you do that, the plan is amended until it's acceptable to you. So bottom line, nobody is forced to do anything they don't want to do.
Is there one council of elders for everybody, or does each person have their own individual council?
What I've seen in the hypnosis sessions is everybody has their own. There are different numbers of beings on different councils, different individual beings. The beings who are on the councils, it's a wide range. It can sometimes be loved ones from the current lifetime who have crossed over, although that's relatively unusual. It can be angels. It can be what we might call extraterrestrial beings, very highly evolved. I think for the most part, we don't, and I don't really understand the nature of the beings who are on the council. And the reason I say that, my sense of them is that these are beings who are so highly evolved, it's beyond my capacity to understand where they're at in their evolution. They're that far advanced. But I can tell you they're unconditionally loving. They're completely non-judgmental. They have a great sense of humor. And they have only the highest good for the client and for all beings as their intention. So people ask any and every question you can possibly think of about the life plan and all sorts of other subjects too. And if it's for their highest good, you get an answer. the counsel will answer. Now, occasionally somebody asks a question that it's actually not for their highest good to get an answer. The most common example of that would be, when am I going to die? It doesn't serve the person to be given a date, and they can't give you a date anyway because there's free will involved in that. So they just decline to answer a question like that, but pretty much everything else they'll answer.
Does the bulk of your research come from your own hypnotherapy sessions or from talking to mediums and channelers?
So I have 3 books in English. The first was Your Soul's Plan. The second is Your Soul's Gift. The third is Your Soul's Love. The first 2, Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift, it's all mediumship and channeling. Then in the third book, Your Soul's Love, I incorporate the between life soul regressions and the sessions with the mediums and channels. At this point, and for the last, I don't know how many years, I've been doing many more private hypnosis sessions and also group hypnosis sessions in the online workshops than sessions in mediumship and channeling. But I am working on another book, and there are mediums and channels on the team. That will be part of the new book as well.
Do you feel that hypnotherapy sessions are more reliable than mediums and channelers, or they're equal?
I would say approximately equal. Of course, the answer to that question depends upon the particular medium or channel. Obviously, the ones I've worked with, I've vetted myself, and I have full confidence in them. So I'd say between the private hypnosis sessions and the particular mediums I work with, it's probably about equal.
I believe that a lot of our behavior stems from our parents because we kind of mirror them in our lifestyle. Do we take that into consideration when choosing our parents?
There are so many factors taken into account. That the choice of parents. So let me back up. What I've seen in my research in pre-birth planning, when we talk about having a life plan, it doesn't mean that things are set in stone. It doesn't mean you have one plan and this is what's going to happen and nothing else is going to happen. Everybody has sets of plans, multiple sets. So things are planned as potentials, possibilities, probabilities, sometimes very high probabilities. There's a very small number of things that are set in stone. And the choice of parents is one of those, meaning, obviously, once you're born, you can't change who your parents are. Because you can't change it, there's so much planning that goes into that choice, many different factors, a lot of consideration. But ultimately, that choice, like every pre-birth choice, is based on unconditional love for everybody involved and great wisdom as well.
What are the common challenges that people choose when they're coming here?
Well, all the things I wrote about in my different books, death of a loved one, physical illness, mental illness, financial challenges, difficult relationships, alcoholism, drug addiction, challenges in romantic relationships, which is the whole subject of the book, Your Soul's Love. These are the most common things that I've seen.
Can you tell us about some of those romantic challenges?
Well, in Your Soul's Love, there are individual chapters about the pre-birth planning of infidelity, asexual romantic relationships, celibate relationships. There is a chapter about being single for an entire lifetime or an extended period out of a lifetime. And other challenges like that. Oh, there's a very interesting chapter that I call Interdimensional Parenting. It's about a woman whose husband died shortly after their first child, a son, was born. He was killed in a plane crash. And he came to his wife in his astral or spirit body right after the plane crashed, told her what had happened, said, everything's going to be okay. We all planned this, including our son, Luca. We agreed to this before we were born. And I'm actually going to help you raise Luca from the other side. And then we go on in the chapter to explore why on earth would 3 souls want to have an experience that is this incredibly difficult. But it turns out there are wonderful reasons for doing that. And that's one of the reasons I put that subject into the book. There aren't that many people who are actually in that circumstance. But what that story shows is that there's deep meaning to even tragedies that on the surface appear to be so horrible that nobody should ever have to go through them.
Have you found in your research that challenges themselves are evolving?
That's a great question. What I would say to that is that we live in a different time now, and we can explore this as much as you might like. I'm sure you know, and your audience knows, that the planet and everybody on the planet is going through an ascension process, moving up dramatically in vibration. And ascension, as I understand it, involves a process called purification. Purification means that there's all this divine light direct from source flooding the planet. It's the light that is causing the ascension process. The light has the effect of bringing to the surface everything unlike itself, everything of a lower vibration. So when you ask if people are now experiencing new challenges, the answer is yes, because they're all, everybody, whether they know it or not, is experiencing the challenge of purification, which essentially means your stuff is now coming to the surface. It's coming to conscious awareness. You can't repress or suppress it anymore because these low vibrational energies, whatever it might be, resentment, anger, lack of forgiveness, unexperienced trauma, whatever it is you've pushed down or tried to contain within your consciousness, it's now coming to conscious awareness, and you have to deal with it. This is a new phenomenon in terms of experiencing challenges.
It's interesting that you bring up because of increased light, because I think that science will note that there are more solar flares happening, and that's a possible cause of global warming. Do you think that's also what's causing the light that you speak of?
As I understand it, the light from the sun is part of the purification and ascension process, but it's not exactly the same thing as the light that's coming direct from source. But both are involved and both are important.
In your opinion, how would the light from source be increasing here?
I can't explain to you the mechanism of action, if that's what you're asking. That is far beyond my pay grade. But I simply understand that this is what is occurring now. And I think the important thing for people to understand, not so much how is it happening, but how to respond to it and work skillfully and lovingly with it. So there are many people, I'm sure in your audience, who know ascension is happening, and they wonder, how can I help? What can I do? Well, if you would like to assist the ascension process, the best thing, the most powerful thing you can do is absorb the ascension energies into your bodies. I'm talking bodies, plural: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. So how do you do that? Well, it will happen on its own, even if you don't make any conscious effort to do it. But you can absorb ascension energies or the light from source more readily, more easily, more fully when you are relaxed and doing nothing. And by doing nothing, I mean physical inactivity and relative mental inactivity as well. So this seems too easy and too simple for a lot of people, but if you really want to help, set aside some time every day or a few days a week to do nothing, literally do nothing, other than relax as much as you can. That is an enormous contribution to ascension.
You mentioned this purification process. Can you talk a little more about that?
So everybody, every human being is like a warehouse inside in their consciousness. And everybody, or almost everybody, unless you're an ascended master already, you have things that you have pushed down and stored in that warehouse because at the time they occurred, they were just too painful to deal with the emotions. And you had to do things in pragmatic terms to cope with what was going on. You had to just get through it as best you could. And so the average person has shoved a lot of unfelt trauma, unexperienced pain into the internal warehouse, largely at the subconscious level, I think. So it's still there. Just because you never fully felt those feelings or that pain doesn't mean that it dissipated somehow. It's still there. And these trapped energies or frozen or crystallized energies, however you want to describe it, they're of a low vibration and they can't go with you to the higher dimension that Earth and humanity is in the process of moving to. So they've got to be released. In order to release them, you have to feel them. You have to feel what you didn't feel. That's how you process and let it go. So, for example, a lot of people are now using different psychedelics and other substances in order to access that internal warehouse. There's an organization called MAPS. I forget now exactly what it stands for, but they're in stage 3 clinical trials. They've been using something called MDMA with combat veterans who have extreme PTSD. They were blown up in a bomb explosion. They couldn't feel the feelings. They just had to scramble about to survive. Now that trauma has been suppressed and needs to be felt to be released. And they're finding a 70 to 80% cure rate with severe PTSD in combat veterans. It's so far along in clinical trials, they expect FDA approval in the next 1 to 2 years. So there are new, you could call this a technology. There are new technologies like that that are coming out that I believe are spirit-driven and are intended to help people clear out that internal warehouse so that you can ascend along with the planet.
When we're talking again about purification, is it just from this lifetime, or is it things that we've been carrying along with us for many lifetimes?
For the average person, it's things from other lifetimes as well. One of the things I found in my research for my books is that one of the main reasons people plan life challenges before they're born is healing. And healing often refers to healing unhealed past life energies. In my first book, Your Soul's Plan, there's a chapter about the pre-birth planning of deafness. And the woman who is the subject of that chapter, her name is Penelope. She was born completely deaf in both ears. I had the extraordinary opportunity to go into her pre-birth planning session and actually hear the conversation that had taken place when she planned the deafness. And what came out is that in the lifetime immediately previous to this one, she had the same mother she has in this lifetime. And in that past life, when she was a little girl, she heard her mother shot to death by the mother's boyfriend. She didn't actually see the murder, but she heard the gunshots that caused her mother's death. She was traumatized by that, so much so that it led her to commit suicide later in that lifetime. So she never healed that trauma in that lifetime. She carried the energy of trauma with her back to the other side. And now in the pre-birth planning, she plans to bring it back into body for the purpose of healing it. So in the pre-birth planning session, her guide says, "My dear, would you prefer to be born deaf so that no similar trauma will happen to you again, and so that you can complete your healing from the last lifetime?" And she says, "Yes, that is what I want and what I wish to do." And then what follows is this fascinating discussion in which she and her guide work out the details of the deafness. But I present this just as an example of somebody planning to bring back into body unhealed energies from past lives. And this is very, very common.
Rob, since we come here with amnesia and we have free will here, do you think it's possible that we make mistakes enough during each lifetime that keeps us coming back forever?
I don't believe that anybody will come back literally forever, but certainly some people come back for more incarnations than others. The important thing to understand here is that nobody is forcing you to come back. You have a life review, as much of your audience will already be aware of, at the end of every incarnation, and you see how you did in terms of fulfilling your pre-birth objectives. You can immerse yourself in these scenes and you feel everything you caused other people to feel. And very often people come away from that feeling incomplete with some lesson or lessons. That feeling of incompletion is karma, as I understand it. So as long as you're feeling incomplete or unresolved, you will almost certainly choose on your own to come back.
A common question I'll ask my guests is, are you coming back next time? And most of the time people say no. And you'll even see in the comments, I'm not coming back either. Why is that?
I think most people just don't enjoy the earth plane experience. There's so much suffering and resistance to well, it's actually a resistance to what you experience that causes the suffering in the first place. I remember reading one of the Conversation with God books many years ago. And in one of those dialogues, God says to Neil Donald Walsh that over 80% of the people who are on Earth don't want to be here. And it's because people just feel that the suffering is too extreme.
Right now on YouTube, what's extremely popular is the idea that we live in a simulated reality, as well as that reincarnation is a soul trap. What are your thoughts on that?
I think depending upon how you define simulated reality, that's probably an accurate way to put it. It's like a virtual reality game. And by that, I mean, for the average person, you plan prior to birth to confine most of the information flowing into your brain as coming through the five senses. Well, we all know, and science has proven, the five senses pick up only a very narrow sliver of all the information that's actually out there. So by limiting your inputs to what's coming from the five senses, you've essentially placed yourself into a simulated reality that seems to be all there is. Now, in this worldwide awakening, people are coming to discover this is not all there is. It's just a very, very tiny drop of all there is. But I think the simulated reality comparison is valid. In terms of reincarnation being a soul trap, I've heard this a number of times before. The only thing I can tell you is that I have not seen any evidence for that in my research. No being, whether it's a person reincarnating, an angel, a master, somebody's higher self, and I've spent countless hours talking to all those different forms of consciousness, nobody has ever said anything to me to indicate that reincarnation is some kind of soul trap.
Do you think it's possible that the council of elders or other beings that people encounter on the other side are just fake and pretending to be these people, but they're really not?
You know, often clients will, after their session, they'll talk about how the unconditional love of the council felt. And they can't find words for it. But if you were to hear them talk about it, and if you could actually see them as they're talking about it, they're glowing. They're just radiant from this experience of this unconditional love that comes from the council. And again, the council is completely non-judgmental. And people say things like, I could tell that my council knew everything about me, including all the bad things I've done in this lifetime, and yet they loved me unconditionally anyway. So people are just overwhelmed by this experience. And to me, this feels completely real, genuine, authentic. I don't believe that kind of unconditional love can be faked. Another thing that I've seen, and it's really very poignant, very moving when this happens. Sometimes in private sessions and also in the group regressions in the workshops, I'll prompt people to say, ask your counsel to give you a direct experience of your essence as a soul. And then again, you would have to see their faces, but it's the same reaction. They're just luminous and overwhelmed and radiant, basking in their true nature as unconditional love. I don't think that that's something that could be faked either.
When you're hypnotizing people, do you encounter the person's higher self? And if so, is that what we are on the other side? Or are we more of like really a complete self and we're just a filtered version here?
Sometimes people's higher selves do come in. And in fact, my wife and I, my wife is a channel. She and I co-teach an online workshop that we call the Higher Self Workshop. The whole purpose of the workshop is to lead people through a regression in which they come into closer contact, closer communion with their higher self so that they can receive inspiration and guidance more easily. So people talk with their higher selves in this regression and sometimes in a between lives regression as well. My sense of it is, my understanding is that the soul, the higher self, is this vast, vast, multi-dimensional being. It has a presence on many, many different dimensions. And so the personality that is here on the earth plane in the third dimension, It's a small portion of the soul's energy placed into a physical body. And because of the vibration of Earth, the density that's here, the average person is, until they learn otherwise, somewhat cut off from the wisdom and the unconditional love of the higher self. So it seems like on the surface that the personality is this watered down version of the higher self. And in an unawakened person, you could be forgiven for coming to that conclusion. But when you see people who are awakening or already awake, people who have experienced or remembered what their higher self is like, or what the one true self that we all are is like, unlimited, unconditional love, unborn, unchanging, deeply powerful, deeply caring. Anybody who has even begun to touch that, they're no longer, quote unquote, watered down. Now it's a whole new ballgame.
Can you share with us the difference in viewpoints of our lives on this side versus the other side?
So, people say things all the time like, this experience that I went through was so horrible. There's just no way I would ever have planned that or agreed to that when I was on the other side. And I totally get that. And certainly I have felt that way about my own challenges as well. But I can tell you, when we're back on the other side, we have a very different perspective. One of the main differences is that we know that a lifetime here is actually very short. I mean, it's here and it's gone like a clap of thunder. There are very few people who have that awareness while they're here in a body. Also, when you're on the other side, you are very much aware that nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. Most people, when they're in body, don't have that awareness. The other main difference is that when we're on the other side, we are very much aware that the wisdom, the growth, the learning, the healing that come out of an incarnation become part of us literally for all eternity. You might or might not have that awareness when you're here in a body. So from that perspective, that nobody is permanently harmed, a lifetime is actually very brief, and yet the wisdom, healing, and growth become part of you for all eternity. From that perspective, it actually does make sense that many beings, not all perhaps, but many, would plan very great challenges for themselves.
Earlier, you mentioned resistance. And I'm assuming you meant resistance to either our challenge or our pre-birth planning, which is, I guess, basically both. But how do we identify that we are resisting?
Well, that's easy. You know you're in at least some degree of resistance anytime you experience any amount of suffering. So suffering is not caused by anything that happens to you. It's caused by your resistance to what is happening to you. This is the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is a physical sensation. Your suffering is your resistance to the pain. You don't like it, and not liking it causes resistance, which causes suffering. So, the great master Krishnamurti said once, I don't mind anything. What he meant by that, I think, is that there's absolutely nothing in life that he ever goes into the slightest degree of resistance to. And therefore, he never experiences suffering. Eventually, all of us will get to that point. And when you get to that point, you don't need to incarnate on Earth anymore.
So you're saying that, for example, if somebody lost their job, if they identified, okay, this is a challenge, and all right, I'll just try to find a new job or do something else instead of obsessing over it and being sad and depressed, that means they're resisting.
Yeah, exactly. If you could completely set the mental narrative, the mental story aside, you would experience sensations, feelings, which would then pass pretty quickly, and so your suffering would be minimized. So if you think about what an emotion is the combination of a story, a mental narrative created by your mind, and sensations that are generated by that story. If you can completely let go of the story, then the only thing that's left are the sensations. All you have to do is allow yourself to feel those until they dissipate. And as long as you allow yourself to feel them, they will dissipate. That's a skill. It takes a lot of practice. but everybody can do it. That's one of the main reasons we're here, is to learn to do that. And you might as well start practicing, because there's nothing more important to do.
Have you noticed big changes in your own personal life when applying that skill?
I feel that I'm still in the early stages of learning to do that. And I feel like I stumble and fall quite a bit. But there are times when I'm successful with it, or relatively successful, and I can let the mental narrative go. And then I'll say things to myself. I find that it helps me do this if I have some kind of mantra that encourages me to surrender. And so one that I have been working with lately that really helps me, and it might sound silly, but it's quite effective. I say to myself, I'm a tea house. I'm an infinite tea house. I have an infinite number of rooms. Every thought is welcome here. Every emotion is welcome here. Every being is welcome here. Every experience is welcome here. Come, sit with me, and have a cup of tea. And when I say that, there's this tremendous relaxation in my physical body. Any agitation or resistance that I was feeling, it just dissipates. I relax, I settle back, and then I allow myself and am able to feel whatever feeling is passing through me. Now, sometimes if the feeling is negative and very intense, that's hard to do. But it's easier when I say that to myself. And the other thing I say that really helps me, I'll just remind myself, this feeling is energy in motion, emotion, energy in motion. So the energy is moving through me. Again, I'm the tea house. Here's my guest who's come for a cup of tea. The guest is going to leave eventually. All I have to do is relax and let the energy move through me. It can't hurt me, although I can cause a lot of suffering if I resist it. But all I have to do really is relax and let it move through, and it eventually will.
It's fascinating for me that you use the word surrender, because that word comes up over and over again in this podcast, especially for near-death experiencers. When they finally surrender to death, they have that it results in the NDE, but you're using it in a different way, but still, again, it's back to surrendering. Do you think that's maybe the whole point, or one of the biggest points in life, is just to surrender?
I do. I think it is perhaps the central point in life. I think it's probably the single most powerful spiritual practice a person can have. Let me share my wife's experience with you, and this will give it a little more color. So my wife agrees that surrender is the most powerful spiritual practice one can have. And she also finds it helpful to say something internally to herself that helps her surrender. What she has found really works for her, she says, this is not my life to live, meaning this is actually God's or Source's life to live. And when she does that, it works to varying degrees depending upon the circumstances. But in general, when she does that, there's such a relaxation that takes place that she feels this whoosh of divine energy coming in. And we talk about it in terms of seat of awareness. So when she does this, the seat of her awareness will shift from the personality, from the thoughts and feelings, to what we call second layer awareness, which is the transpersonal self, the one true self. There's like a falling back into a field of light, and that field of light is the transpersonal self. So for her, this is not my life to live. That's the mantra that really does it. But she and I are doing the same thing, just in somewhat different ways.
Does your wife believe that ultimately we are all one? I mean, like we are all God?
She does believe that. I believe that. She would tell you that she's had experience of that. This is what some people call non-dual reality. So non-dual reality, as I understand it, is the nature of the universe. The vast, vast majority of the universe is non-dual in nature. Earth is this little sliver that's dual in nature, up and down, left and right, good and bad, hot and cold. When she slips into non-duality, it's unstable. And this, I understand, is a common phenomenon for people when they start to experience the non-dual state. They can be there for a little while and they slip out of it, and then they can get back to it and they slip out of it again. And that can go on for many years until it actually stabilizes. So she's in the phase where it's unstable, but she has numerous periods in which she's in this state of oneness consciousness, and she knows experientially that we all are one. It isn't just a concept, that's her experience.
Have you ever heard of the term seeding? And if not, I don't blame you because I've only heard it once. But from what I understand, it's the very first time that we separate from Source or from God. And after doing that, from that very first time, that creates a lot of problems with us of abandonment because, we're separate now.
I have never heard the term seeding before, but let me share my understanding of what it is that you just discussed. So as I understand it, the way we came to be here is that eons ago in linear time, all the billions of souls who are here now got together, and we essentially said, we want to do something that has never been done before. We want to make a unique contribution to the Godhead. What could that be? So a lot of ideas were discussed, and we came up with the idea of separation. We said, what would it be like if we experienced ourselves as separate individuals, if we left the state of oneness consciousness? Now, we knew that you can't actually do that. It's not possible. But you can set up a simulated reality in which you appear to be a separate individual. When we came up with this idea, as I understand it, those more highly evolved than us, those who love and guide us, said, we don't advise you to do this. We think it is not a good idea. It's going to create a lot of suffering. And then there was a lot of discussion, and I mean a lot of discussion, back and forth. Should we, shouldn't we? Can we handle it? Can't we? In the end, those who love and guide us stuck to their position and said, we don't advise you to do this. And we essentially said, we're noted, but we've got this, we can do it, and we're going to do it. Then we created separation. And in the instant separation was created, God or Source foresaw that we would all change our minds because it's such a painful state to be in, and immediately put in plan a place to bring us home. The plan is ascension. The plan is purification. Ascension is redemptive in nature, meaning it's bringing us back to Source, back to oneness consciousness, out of separation.
Since there are 8 billion people on the planet, do you think that they're all here to experience the ascension? Because there's more people than ever.
Well, certainly if somebody stays in body through the ascension process, then they're here to experience it. A lot of people have left. A lot of people are going to leave. I think some of those who leave the body, you can't conclude that they weren't able to raise their vibration sufficiently in order to ascend. That could be. And I think those people need more third dimensional experience, and they'll go on to plan that. But I think there are also a very large number of people who left the body because they feel they can assist ascension best from the other side. They've just chosen to help from non-physical form.
I've heard you mention that the Earth goes through 26,000-year cycles. What for?
That's really an astrology matter, and I don't know all that much about astrology, but it's sort of the in-breath and the out-breath of God, as I understand it. So for 26,000 years, it's like God is breathing out, and we're moving away from Source in our perception of Source. And then there's the in-breath, the return, the ascension, the redemption, and that's where we return to a state of oneness consciousness. This cycle happens in 26,000 years. I'm not sure exactly why it's 26,000, but people who are much more knowledgeable about astrology than I am, many of them say it's a 26,000-year cycle.
Your 3 books are called Your Soul's Plan, Your Soul's Gift, and Your Soul's Love. Is it possible you're working on another one?
I am. It doesn't have a title yet, and I have no idea when it will be done. I like to take my time writing books, so probably a period of years. This one is about large-scale events. And people have been asking me questions about those ever since I started doing this kind of work. And so I want to find out what is involved in the pre-birth planning of large-scale events. So that's the focus.
Are you working on anything else that you want us to know about?
Well, my wife, as I mentioned, is a channel. She channels a group consciousness, a collective we call the Beings of Light. And they've produced a number of really wonderful, uplifting channelings, which are on my website at yoursoulsplan.com. Many of them you can read for free. We're going to compile those into a book. And for each one of the channelings, I'm going to write a commentary with whatever my thoughts are about that particular subject.
If people have questions, should they contact you through your website?
That's the best way. There's a contact form at yoursoulsplan.com. Just put your comments into the form. I would also invite people, if you go to the website, as soon as you get there, there's a pop-up that will ask you to sign up for the newsletter. Please do that if this subject interests you. We have a lot of offerings, online workshops. The newsletter has my wife's channelings in it. That's the best way to stay informed. And to see the upcoming workshops, click on events in the main menu. The other really notable thing on the website, if you click on sessions, you come to the page that describes the Between Lives soul regression. There's actually a 1-hour video on that page where you can watch a private Between Lives soul regression. That will tell you what it's all about.
Rob, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
The positive message I want people to hear is that in the many conversations I've had with Spirit and the many channeling sessions, it's my understanding that Ascension is such a monumental event. There were 3 times as many souls as available bodies. In other words, there were 3 times as many beings who wanted to incarnate now as could incarnate. So how was the decision made? Well, you had to survive this 1 in 3 cut. And the way the decision was made is that you have something in particular to offer the ascension process. Maybe you know what that is, maybe you don't. But I can assure you, if you're in body now during ascension, you were chosen, you made a 1 in 3 cut, and you have something in particular to offer the Earth's ascension. So contemplate what that might be, and then bring it forward. That's why you're here.
Rob, thank you for that message, and thank you again for being my guest.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.